As someone who appreciates the value of human life, as a survivor of sexual assault, and someone who cares deeply about the safety and security of women and children across the globe, I am horrified that we continue to put border security at the bottom of our policy to-do list. On January 31st, 2016, the same day as her college graduation, Iowan Sarah Root was killed by an illegal immigrant named Edwin Mejia. He was drag racing with a blood alcohol level more than 3 times the legal limit. Despite repeated requests by local law enforcement, Immigration and Customs Enforcement failed to detain Mejia because of a catch-and-release policy that ultimately allowed him to escape the country. Unfortunately, this is the same policy that President Biden supported during the Obama administration. Still, more than 4 years later, Mejia remains a fugitive, denying Sarah's loved ones any sense of justice and closure. After today, I will have now live UC'd this bill twice, and I expect the same thing to happen today as it did last time, that it will be objected to by my Democratic colleagues. As a mother, I cannot fathom the grief that Sarah's family, her mother and father, Michelle and Scott, her brother, and her friends continue to feel after such a devastating loss. Sarah had her whole future in front of her, but her opportunity to make her mark on the world was tragically cut short. At the same time, while Sarah Root's mother and father grieve a child without a parent continues to make the perilous journey at the hands of a smuggler. Many arrive here dehydrated and malnourished and subject to unspeakable atrocities, from rape to assaults. Since Inauguration Day, we have seen record numbers of children at the border, a heartbreaking humanitarian crisis. Before then, the Migrant Protection Protocols, or the Remain in Mexico policy, was in place and helped keep migrants safely in Mexico until the United States had a chance to process them. This policy single-handedly reduced the need for bed space in the U.S., protected migrants from that treacherous journey through Mexico, and kept our facilities from being dangerously overcrowded. Border Patrol agents were able to return to their originally assigned duties of patrolling for drugs and human traffickers. But as we've heard time and again, and something that's very true, elections have consequences. President Biden, before he even had the chance to unpack, made serious changes to immigration policies, changes that have resulted in the national emergency at the U.S.-Mexico border. First, he rolled back the Remain in Mexico policy, and that's a big reason why we have a crisis at the border today. Instead of keeping migrants in Mexico and deterring those from making the dangerous journey north, the vacancy sign is on. But the reality is we are out of space. It feels as if the Biden administration is starting to see the reality of the disaster they created at our southern border. They're now walking this reversal back and asking the Mexican government to reinstate the previous administration's policy. On his first day in office, President Biden signed an executive order suspending all domestic deportation proceedings. If Sarah Root's story played out today, Immigration and Customs Enforcement would not pick up her killer, and the same tragedy could happen again and again. Although nothing can bring beautiful Sarah back to her family, we can ensure that the federal government never makes this mistake again. Today, I rise to call upon my Senate colleagues to help make that happen, to stop another tragedy like Sarah's from happening with a simple and clean fix. I am asking the Senate to join myself and 22 of our colleagues and pass my bill, Sarah's Law. Sarah's Law is simple. It requires that ICE take custody of a person who is in the country illegally, and if they are charged with a crime that seriously injures another person. It also mandates a better victim notification system that lets victims and their families, like the Root family, know what happened to their loved ones. Sarah's Law is about as common sense and effort as there is. It recognizes the simple fact that all criminals should be held accountable for their actions, all criminals, and not simply allowed to slip back into the shadows. If Sarah's Law is passed, people who are in this country illegally and murder another person would be prioritized for deportation if released. Who could be opposed to this? In fact, a previous vote on this bill in the form of an amendment was supported by the majority of the Senate and was bipartisan. No family should ever have to endure such a tragedy, especially one that could have been prevented. Mr. President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of S-80 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Madam President, reserving the right to object.
Democratic Majority Whip.
Madam President, the senator from Iowa tells us a compelling story of Sarah Root, whose death at the hands of a drunk driver is a tragedy. However, I respectfully suggest this legislation is not the answer. This bill that she is proposing would require the mandatory detention of immigrants charged, not convicted, charged with certain crimes. The mere allegation of criminal conduct would result in months, possibly years of detention before conviction. Indefinitely detaining immigrants, regardless of whether they actually committed a crime, regardless of circumstances, violates a principle that is deeply embedded in the American legal system: innocent until proven guilty. Under this bill, someone wrongly arrested wouldn't be eligible for an individualized bond determination. This is not consistent with the basic tenets of due process in our Constitution. Creating a new category of immigrants subject to indefinite detention for being charged also could be harmful to the survivors of domestic violence. Over 20 years ago, I was introduced to a group in Chicago. The name of the group, and I'm sorry if I don't pronounce it correctly, I'm pretty close, is Los Mujeres Latinas en Acción. This is a group that came together to try to protect undocumented mothers and wives from domestic abuse. And the reason why they came together was these poor women were being victimized and abused in ways unthinkable and were so afraid to report it to police because of their undocumented status. So this group of women in the community came together and said, we have to build a shelter. These women have to get away from their abusive husbands who many times were also abusing the children. And that's what happened. And today it's still there and still needed. These survivors of domestic abuse, many times in desperation, would finally strike back at the abusive husband. And some of them were even subject to arrest for assault against the abusing husband. Under the proposal today that's being suggested by the senator from Iowa, that woman, having been abused by that husband for so many years, finally striking back and assaulting the husband and being charged, would automatically be incarcerated. There wouldn't be a judge to consider the reality of the circumstances in her life. Survivors of human trafficking, sexual assault, and domestic violence are often at risk of arrest initially, but many times in court, when the circumstances are explained, a different conclusion is reached. In one study, nearly half of the incarcerated women in the study described assaults they had committed in their own defense. This bill has no exception for immigrants who are charged with crimes that resulted from their defending themselves against violence. Let me add, too, this bill is not necessary. Our immigration laws give to ICE the authority to detain people who are deportable. In fact, there are thousands of people detained right now using this authority. There is no question that our immigration system is far from perfect and is a broken system. We have a responsibility and we have an authority in Congress to reform our immigration law. If the senator from Iowa is interested in working on bipartisan immigration reform, I welcome the opportunity to ask her to join us to try to find pragmatic bipartisan solutions. An initial meeting today, bipartisan meeting of senators, opened the conversation. But trying to pass this bill by unanimous consent is not the way to approach this very complex problem. We need to roll up our sleeves and say, let's, as senators, on a bipartisan basis, do it. I stand ready to do so. I hope the senator from Iowa does too. As tough as it may be, we need to tackle these issues and not ignore them as they were for the last 4 years under the previous Republican president. For those reasons, I object.
Madam President.
Objection overruled. Or exception is heard, excuse me.
Madam President.
The senator from Iowa.
Yes, I appreciate my colleague's comments, the senator from Illinois, but there is no doubt that we have a problem in the United States today. Our immigration system does need to be reformed, but it does need to be done in a bipartisan manner. This, when presented as an amendment on the floor of the Senate, was a bipartisan supported amendment. And it deals with those that are charged with bodily injuring another person or of murder. That's what happened in Sarah's case. ICE is given the opportunity to detain an individual. But in this case, ICE chose not to, even though a young woman was murdered by a man operating under multiple assumed names with no familial ties in the area. The man was allowed to slip back into the shadows, and Sarah Root's family will likely never, ever see justice. So the pendulum swings both ways. I would much rather see Edwin Mejia face justice than allow a family of a young murdered woman to go without. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.